Nice to meet you.
Person.
In person, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Radhika Rangarajan. I am the co-founder and executive director of Women in Big Data. We are a community sponsor. And I have to say, I absolutely fell in love with what Tim said about building inclusive communities, because that's what we've been about for the last 10 years. I actually grew up with Spark and Hadoop, so I feel a little dated. But I actually worked at Intel for about 20 years, and then I was with VMware until recently, and spent a lot of time on open source. And 10 years ago, we didn't see the kind of representation we wanted to see in open source. So that's where we started with Women in Big Data. It started in a conference room with just 3 people at Intel, and then fast forward, we are about 22,000 worldwide, and we have about 4 nonprofit entities. And we do a lot of partnerships with a lot of open source communities, and you can find us at every tech conference. And actually, the community is pretty much run by people like you, all of you. Pretty much every community member has one foot in tech, and they are an engineer, they are a CDO, they are a machine learning data scientist. So if you have the time, I would highly encourage you to check us out. Give your time to run a technical workshop, to offer a mentorship program, whatever you can to move the community forward. Okay, enough about the community. We're here to have a conversation, to hear from these very interesting people. But one thing I would say is for the last 9 years, we've been observing and championing how open technologies can actually move and democratize innovation in data and AI. I know we heard a lot about how it all started with Meta, and we have a wonderful customer or consumer perspective from Bolt, and then obviously a partner technology, innovator player from Denodo. So we're going to make this fun. So we might actually call on you for some questions as well, but I want to actually invite my panelists to go ahead, introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do, what your role is, and we'll take it from there.
I can go first.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, thanks for. I'm very happy to be here. It's I think my second or third PrestoCon. Lots of familiar faces. It's really nice to see the kind of community coming together. So I'm Pedro. I'm a software engineer at Meta. I've been at Meta for, I think, about 11 years now, so it's been a while. Always working with some sort of data infrastructure project, like developing query engines, databases, and things like that. Funny story, that was the beginning of my career, I was developing a kind of a separate database that was, in a way, sort of a Presto competitor. So I was doing that in a system called Kubrick for about 5 years with some of you, with Sergey and other people. So we did that for a while. At some point, we kind of realized that the systems are kind of close enough that we shouldn't have that many systems. We should converge things. That's when I ended up kind of joining the Presto team. I think it was about 4 to 5 years ago. I work a lot with the Presto team. I work a little closer with Velox. I also work with Vivek, Sridhar, and other managers from Compute with Spark. So I work across compute engines in general, but kind of query execution, data management, that's kind of the thing I've been doing.
Fantastic.
I'll continue. Hi, everyone. I'm Konstantin, or Kostya. I'm from a company called Bolt. We are a mobility company in Europe and Africa. It's not the same Bolt you may know from US. We'll talk a bit about that in our talk, which is going to be right after this one. And yeah, I've been working mostly on running data platforms for various companies for the last, 7, 8 years. Before that, I was doing some backend engineering, working on distributed backend systems. And lately at Bolt, I've been leading the migration to open lakehouse architecture, which we've successfully completed a while ago. And Presto is one of the technologies that we are using in our stack. So happy to talk about it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. My name is Pablo Alvarez, and I lead the product management team at Denodo. I'm based here in San Francisco, and I've been doing this for, I think, 15 years. Yeah, it's been a while. My role, well, Denodo as a company is focused on data management in a broad sense. We do a lot of data security, multi-source federation, data ingestion, things like that. semantic modeling. And we recently, as of a year and a half, 2 years ago, adopted Presto as a kind of embedded MPP engine for our offering. And big part of my job has been, well, being the liaison of the Presto Foundation and try to understand how that can influence our roadmap and decide where the product is going in the near future.
Awesome. You know, I was listening to this morning's talks, and what I found interesting is I think Presto is at its unique intersection of three key shifts that we are seeing. A shift towards open architecture, continued push for community-driven innovation, and then a continuing demand for querying across diverse data sources. All of these, and Presto is in the middle of it. So I want to take us back there, and I'll start with you, Pedro. Meta's use of Presto. But let's start with the architectural decisions and how it has evolved and how some of the community contributions may have led to that. Maybe you can shed some light there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can add some context. I think part of that Vivek also touched on this morning, but Presto was started, I think, a little bit over 10 years ago at Meta. I think the whole point was a lot of our warehouse compute was based on Hive. We needed something a little more efficient, not just more efficient, but something that provided lower latency as well. So I think at that point was just like, kind of coming up with something that has a slightly better distributed programming paradigm than just MapReduce, right? So I think the point there was just kind of having something that people can use to query the warehouse more interactively. There was always kind of this idea of having compute disaggregated with storage, having something better with than Hive, but it was a little more focused on dashboard generation and data exploration in general. So I think a lot of the design decisions was just kind of to focus kind of towards interactivity. Moving forward, there was also some work on kind of how can we reduce the latency even further, right? So there was this idea of kind of having local data with Raptor and then kind of local caching with RaptorX that eventually sort of graduated into Prestissimo, where just kind of the caching memory and SSD, it's a lot more seamless. So I think there was a lot of design decisions kind of focused more on interactivity, data exploration, and dashboard generation. But I think at some point people also realized that the engine is also useful for batch and kind of large-scale data pipelines and sort of data preparation. So Presto also started being used for batch, right? So I think there was always this intent of having a single engine where we can run interactive and batch. There was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of efforts in Presto in trying to materialize shuffles and trying to run Presto on top of Spark and kind of really, really scale. But I think there was, at least in my perspective, there was a point where we see that at least for Meta, that we still need Spark just because Spark has also other design decisions. So I think, again, this is part of what Vivek was mentioning. I think at this point we have this two-engine strategy where we use Presto for all the interactive and kind of dashboard generation and part of batch, but we don't have this intention of kind of just using Presto for all the large-scale batch. So this is a little more historically, more recently. I think Tim kind of covered this this morning as well. Like there was this whole idea of kind of moving towards composable data engines, which is this idea that we at Meta we don't have only Presto, right? We have Presto, we have Spark, we have stream processing, we have engines for training, and we have like 10 to 20 of those. So it was really kind of hard and expensive to maintain all of them. So how you can design more kind of reusable components that we can reuse across engines and then be more efficient when developing and maintaining those things. Which the first big effort was Velox, right? So I think this whole transition into C++ was not just moving into C++, but moving into this sort of composable architecture. So this is one of the more recent shifts. Another thing that it's a little even more recent that we're still investigating is whether Presto can provide even lower latency. Right? I think what we started seeing is there's a lot of space for kind of even more interactive analytics into based on smaller data sets. Think of things like DuckDB and MotherDuck. So kind of having a similar architecture, but would Presto be the right architecture to run something like that? So imagine like very similar kind of software stack, but a different deployment strategy. So I think there's still a few questions on whether Presto is the right tool for that job. We have a few people on the team kind of trying to look into that, but those are kind of the more recent things or sort of maybe architectural questions going on.
Thank you for that. And Kostya, I know you probably have a talk later today, but maybe you can give us a preview on how it all got started at Bolt.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't want to obviously repeat too much of the talk, but if we talk briefly about it, we started with the monolithic data platform when I joined, which was centered around Redshift, and that caused quite a few issues for us at the scale we started to hit. So we did pretty thorough investigation of alternatives that we could use. And at the time, we ended up choosing actually Presto as part of the solution for these problems and open lakehouse architecture. The other part being Spark, so kind of close to what guys at Meta are doing actually. And yeah, that's the architecture we went with, and it did solve the issues that we were having with the monolithic architecture. It introduced a lot of new issues that we are solving right now, but that's usually the case, with new things. And when you solve one problem, you have new challenges to solve. So we'll talk about that as well. I guess if briefly, that's pretty much it.
Well, for anything else, you have to go to his talk. But that's good. Pablo, I'm going to actually ask you all ecosystem questions. Tell us, yeah, I know you briefly mentioned your passion in that space. So tell us a little bit more on what you're observing in terms of how organizations are actually looking at Presto as well as the ecosystem to build more future-ready architectures.
I think definitely from the perspective of what I see in the market, like people started coming to us with something relatively new, like 3-4 years ago, which is we have this first data in Parquet, then data in open table formats. And we traditionally have been a layer above that, where we, as I mentioned, we do semantic modelings, we do security and things like that. And that was something new to us. It's like, well, now we have this data. What do we do with that? And we needed an engine on top of that to be able to work with those data sets in the massive scales that we were seeing. So that was, in terms of like what we were doing as a company, created a paradigm shift. And in terms of like what people was doing with that is kind of all over the place. We actually have 2 customers that will be doing sessions today, talking a little bit about that. Jim, that is sitting right in front of me, will be doing one of those. But a lot of like different things that involve like those large volumes to improve like decision making. In ways that 5-6 years ago were not possible. And I know that's not the question that you asked, but I want to touch a little bit on what they were talking about earlier, because I think it's a point that I think is worth bringing up here, which is at that point, seeing these different scenarios, these different use cases, we had to make the call, what do we do with this? What do we choose? Do we implement something ourselves? Do we choose an open source project? And if so, which one? Because up until that point, our contribution to open source have been more focused on individual libraries. We were quite involved, for example, with Spring, like Apache Commons and things like that, but not like as a full-on product like Presto is. So we had to look at the space, look at the market, and what we found was a lot of like not true open source projects. This is things that are partially open source, or like it's only one company behind it. So like this, if you try to contribute, they're really controlling the contributions. And I want to echo kind of what Tim mentioned earlier. We found Presto as one of the really few data projects, data engine projects that had that aspect of openness. And that combined with and I talk a little bit about this in my talk later also, but that backed by the idea of Meta with the scale that it brings, that gives you something that is battle hardened, and the roadmap, the future, like when we're looking at like the PrestoCons at the time, all these discussions about vlogs and C++. Those three things combined, I think it creates something very unique that you don't see really that often out there. So we really were sold on that idea. We want to be part of this. So sorry, I deviated a little bit the question,
That's
but
perfectly fine.
I thought I wanted to touch on that to complement what they have said from a vendor perspective as well.
So that's good. 2 talks for you, and Kostya, 1 talk. Are you giving any talks today?
No, not really.
Okay, all right. So please catch up on their talks. I'm going to actually mix things up a little, and this is going to be a surprise for you guys. That's all right, right? So we're going to do rapid fire, 1-word answers. Just yell it out. And if any of you have some ideas, do the same. Okay. And not in any particular order, okay? So complete this phrase. We are at the precipice of 2025, so by 2025, every data platform will need governance. Very good. Any other?
Generative AI.
All right. Okay. I knew that was going to come in. Let's call it built-in guardrails, AI guardrails.
I think one goes with the other.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to go with something similar. Say that every data platform will have to process some machine learning and AI data in some shape or form.
We can't separate ourselves from there. So yes. Any other interesting responses out there? Come on. Security goes along with governance as well. Yes. Excellent.
I hope they already have security.
All right. We'll do one more. In 1 word. What's the biggest advantage of open data platforms? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Lower cost.
I'll
Okay.
go with the community.
Community. All right.
Trust.
Trust. Interoperability. Robustness. Democratization. Okay. I feel like I'm in my tribe here. So excellent. One more before we go to the next round of questions. The next big disruption in data architecture will come from
Is it a single word answer?
single word. Single word. Anybody?
I want to say business users.
Business users. Okay.
In the sense that we've seen a lot of kind of developer to business in the past, and I think we're going to see more business to developers in the future. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I'll
No
go,
wrong answer, by the way.
I'll go with AI, but I'll explain. I think not just kind of using AI in the data platform itself, but more on this idea that today kind of analytic systems like Presto and systems that are kind of targeted for machine learning, training, data, like they're all very fragmented. So I do feel like the next disruption would be sort of unifying them in more cohesive and sort of unified platforms. Like that's something that we've been kind of discussing and investing to some extent at Meta.
I asked you for a word. You just gave me a paragraph. So
I'm just explaining my answer.
that's all good.
It's less about using Gen AI to generate SQL and like things like that. Is more like kind of unifying from a data perspective.
I hear you. Next gen data center. Oh. Ah. Nice. All right. Now that we've woken up the audience, I think we'll go to a couple more questions here. I want to actually go back to this ecosystem fragmentation and consolidation. What does it mean for Presto? I mean, we have seen how things evolved during the Hadoop, Spark ages, the Cloudera ages. Where are we heading towards? Let's start with you, Pablo.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think there was a lot of fragmentation in the days of Hortonworks and Cloudera. Like what year was that? 2016, 2017. Then things seemed to consolidate a little bit more. Now there is again like sort of a battle of formats, and you guys just opened up another table format recently. I think there is pros and cons. I think there's still to see where all of this goes. On one hand, I'm concerned more formats mean more work without really. There is certain innovation in the new formats, but at the same time, to incorporate those formats into all the capabilities that are already there, there is a lot of catching up work that needs to happen. So it's innovation on one front, but it slows innovation on another, because now in Presto you need to support Iceberg, Delta, Nimble, Parquet, Hoodie. And to get the same capabilities in all of those, you are still in time from developers that would be innovating in one. And it's an ongoing debate. Like, there's a lot of back and forth, for example, with Databricks and Snowflake on this topic, and who's right there. So I actually don't have an answer, but it's definitely a lot of work for a vendor to cope with the proliferation of formats. And sometimes you feel questionable gains in all that effort.
Maybe I'll come back to you on that in our crystal ball predictions round, and you can predict what might happen. So.
I think like in every cycle, there's a proliferation followed by consolidation, and VHS and beta in the 80s, and CDs and mini discs and these things in the 2000s, and now everything is in the cloud. And I think there'll be another cycle of consolidation. I don't know how and when and won by whom, or if there's winners and losers at all, but I think there'll be consolidation at some point.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's this interesting trend. Like if you go back to where databases started, like there was no data sharing, like no sharing of software or anything, right? You had like your own software you deploy. And that was it for many, many years. Then you started disaggregating storage, and then with cloud computing, like you started to at least kind of share your blobs, right? So you could just put your data in S3 and then you're done. And then at some point, people were like, oh, maybe we should use the same file formats. And then it became Parquet or C and all of that. And now we're to sort of table formats, right? Not just the file, but like how do those files make up tables? Now I think with Velox and the whole composability idea, like you can see that this may be a next step, right? Not just the tables and file formats are the same, but the execution itself could be the same. So I think there's this interesting trend of like this sort of consolidation going up the stack. There's a discussion that maybe this should go up to how we represent queries, so maybe query optimization, maybe all the way to the front end, the SQL parser. And I mean, that's something we still need to see, but I don't know how much of that will help us address fragmentation in itself. At least it kind of reduce some of the duplication of work, kind of re-engineering of things. But at least like it's an interesting trend that's happening.
I would say that I think consolidation is already happening to an extent. I see some signs of it. Like, for example, Databricks implemented interoperability for all these different formats. Like, you can read Iceberg files using Delta API and vice versa. And I think I've seen at least one open source project, sorry I forgot the name, that does the same thing. So while there is definitely this fragmentation happening, there is simultaneous push I see for kind of having a unified interface, at least, to deal with all of these different implementations. And I think this will go hand to hand. And maybe it's not an entirely bad thing. And if you can abstract things at an interface level, then maybe having some different implementations with different trade-offs is not the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Can I add some closing thought to that? I think if you go really, well, this couldn't be far into the future, but like maybe another decade, I like to think that Lakehouse and in general kind of like data engines become sort of a commodity. So the focus of the industry is more on like what you can do on top of that data, like the management, the operationalization, even the security, the insight gathering, and all of that. And the part behind becomes a commodity. Kind of like what happened with OSs, and there is still fragmentation there. There is like 3 major OSs, but I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was more of a battle of like OSs, and now it's like they have like some segments where they are kind of like best fit for it, and I don't see that battle between Windows and Linux and like it was like at that point. The OS became a commodity. I think the data systems, in the sense of like the execution engine and the table format, will be commoditized, and you will not think of like buying database engine. Like today you buy Snowflake or Databricks or Presto. You will buy a data system that you focus your decision making on what you can do with that data and what it offers you in terms of insight generation, not that much on the, like what happens with cars. You don't buy a car because there is a particular piston that is part of the engine. You buy a car because of the global kind of set of capabilities it gives you. I don't know.
Now, speaking of trends, I'm always curious about when a technology is developed, are we actually seeing areas where you're pushing boundaries for which it wasn't invented? So what are some things that you're seeing in terms of unexpected innovations or use cases for which Presto is being used for?
I can maybe quickly add something to that. I think from our use cases, one of the things is what I mentioned before, like this idea of like sort of, would Presto be a good platform to run DuckDB, mother duck type of use cases? Like, would that, could it provide such a low level of latency and things like that? I think that's something we're still investigating. But I think for us in general, the biggest question is also something I just mentioned, but like around processing data for machine learning. We like to say that machine learning today is our biggest customer. Like, so it used to be dashboards, business intelligence, analytics, and all of that. Like today, it's not anymore. Today, most of data is training data, and most compute goes into processing training data. So like those are kind of our biggest customers, and we don't do a good job at serving them. There's a lot of things that people try to do with Presto on top of this data, and it doesn't work really well because the data shape is different, because physical design is slightly different. That's why I think we mentioned that we recently open sourced this new file format. It was just something that, well, Parquet wouldn't support really well. But there's a lot of things regarding the data, just how wide the data is, and how how large some of the elements are that Presto wasn't really designed. Like some of those things we're addressing with Velox now and getting better. But I feel like this is the part where we're really pushing the envelope, and because they're becoming our biggest customers, and Presto still does it's not there, cannot serve them really well. I think that this is one of the areas that there's kind of active discussions. Like, is this something that we could extend existing compute engines to support, or is this something that kind of warrants a whole new design? We don't have a good answer yet, but it's something we're investigating.
Anything else from your perspective, Kostya? Especially from the implementation journey. Any surprises?
I mean, our use cases in terms of what we use Presto for, I would say are fairly common, but we are building some things around it that I would say maybe are not as widely spread. So, for example, that's also going to be covered in our talk, but we're building a centralized data governance solution across different compute engines, because it's actually a huge pain to manage all this individually for each one of them when you have thousands of users that can access them in a multiple ways. Of course, you can go with this making Presto like the main interface that every query goes through, but we don't do that. So we have multiple pathways how you can access the data. And yeah, we do feel like this open lakehouse architecture has some requirement for having such a centralized solution for managing data access and various other things related to data governance in one place for all the components of the lakehouse that you have.
Yeah, I actually found, Tim actually made a little comment on this regard. We adopted Presto as an engine to try to deal with the scale and large volumes and huge requirements. And I think I was a bit surprised that when you look at many of the use cases, it was actually adopted by small, not really small, but medium-sized companies with medium-sized use cases that have relatively small clusters, which we didn't actually anticipate. So it's, I think testament to the versatility of the engine and the, how well it works in a variety of scenarios that we were aiming for that. And those are there, but then there's all these others kind of like smaller size scenarios that I was a little surprised to discover that people have adopted it and been very successful with it.
And for more on that, check out his talk. So, last round. We have probably about a minute left. So keep your answers to just one sentence, no paragraphs here. This is a crystal ball round. Okay, Pedro, you ready?
Yes.
What currently impossible data processing challenge will open platforms solve in the next 3 years? It's a prediction, so go for it.
One sentence. I think I'll go with what Ori said in the back, like just running data management into evolving hardware platforms like GPUs and accelerators and things like that.
All right. Okay, Kostya, you ready? Now you get my favorite topic, AI/ML. So how will AI/ML workloads change the requirements for query engines like Presto?
I have a controversial take here.
We love controversies.
I think you don't have to solve every problem with the same tool, so maybe Presto is not the tool for it, or maybe it is. But I definitely see opportunities to leverage AI and ML to improve problems that Presto is solving currently. So, for example, leverage statistics from query logs to improve query execution using some ML techniques. That's something that we were even thinking about longer term, looking into. So,
All right, I said bold prediction, not safe prediction. But it was good. Okay, Pablo, what's your bold prediction for the future of open data collaboration? This is your chance to be bold.
Open data collaboration. What do you mean with that? Kind of like different systems having a format that has interoperability, or?
Interpret it as you see it.
I mean, that's already here, so I think there's not much in terms of prediction. It's very green, but yeah, I feel that vendors realize that just sharing within their own platform wasn't enough, and that's something fueling like the developments these days. That's, I think, going to be a reality probably during 2025, without going any further into the future. Data sharing through Polaris and Iceberg and Delta sharing and all these things, I think is going to be one of the major trends of next year.
All right.
$1 billion acquisitions next year.
What was the name of the company that Databricks acquired?
Tabular.
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe.
That was I was in the Snowflake event when they announced that, and they were at the booth right next to ours, and they left after that. The booth was empty.
That's a wrap, right? After that.
So it was an interesting day.
If you look at the next layer on the stack, like on top of the table format, you would have the sort of the execution engine, which is Velox. I don't know of any companies, but I would put my. It's a bold statement, but I think that's there's a lot of potential there.
All right. Well, I know we are the ones standing between them and their break. So I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. We had so much fun. Thank you so much. Once again, we all know, unless we are developing technologies for just one particular demographic, we have to build inclusive communities to actually move technologies forward. So continue to be part of the community, continue to give to communities like Women in Big Data. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.